Today, we are going to look at three-dimensional models of a human torso in order to look at the various parts of the human respiratory system first, and after that we are looking at the human circulatory system, the major structures that we can see in this torso. For the respiratory system, we are going to start with where air enters through the nostrils. The pathway that air takes, we can trace using my pointer. So when you breathe in, once your mouth is closed, the air would travel down to the back of your throat, over the pharynx, and it would enter into your trachea. In the model, the trachea is covered with other structures. You can see the thyroid gland here, and you can see here the larynx or the voice box. So the trachea, which is the actual tube through which the air has to travel, is located behind these structures. And you can see where it emerges just at the base of the neck in the upper shoulder region. It appears to be blue and white in this particular model, and it's located behind this blue blood vessel. Once air is in the trachea and gets to this point, the trachea branches into two major bronchioles which enter the lungs. In this view, which shows us all of the various organs that are present in the two major cavities, that is the upper thoracic cavity and the lower abdominal cavity, we are interested today in the structures that are found in the upper cavity, in the thoracic cavity. This cavity is separated from the lower abdominal cavity by a large band of muscular tissue known as the diaphragm. And the diaphragm is one of those structures that helps us to breathe in and out. So its contraction lowers the diaphragm to allow the thorax to attain a greater volume, and air is pulled in, and when we breathe out, the diaphragm returns to its dome-shaped structure and reduces the volume within the thoracic cavity so that air can be pushed back up through the bronchioles, which we can't see right now because they're under the lungs, back up through the trachea and up through the pharynx and then out through the nose. Breathing is also possible, of course, through your mouth, as you would know whenever you have a stuffy nose, let's say from a cold or sinus attack. Because notice that the pathways, both the oral cavity, your mouth, as well as the nasal cavity, both of them connect in the back at the pharyngeal region. So air can enter through either of these pathways. However, it's better when you're breathing normally to have air enter through the nasal cavity, because in here the air can be warmed and also filtered, since there are tiny hairs, which we are not seeing in the model, but which exist in your own nasal cavities that will help to filter particles from the air that you breathe in. The mouth is not designed in such a way so that air that passes through the mouth cannot really be filtered. This is a very similar torso to the one that I was showing you initially. In this one, the lungs have been removed. The external bits that we were looking at previously have been removed to allow us to see the structures that are inside. The heart, which is located in the center of the thoracic cavity and angled slightly to the left, has also been removed, because what we are looking at today is the various parts of the respiratory system. So we want to see the connection between the tracheal tube, which is a tube that brings the air from the upper region, from your pharynx, and It's the blue and white band that we're seeing behind this major blood vessel. Down here, we can see that behind the heart, the trachea branches to form these two major bronchi. And each bronchus is a singular term, so this is one bronchus, the right bronchus, and this is the left bronchus. Each one branches again, as you should be able to see in this model, to form tiny tubes known as bronchioles. Eventually, the bronchioles branch into air sacs or alveoli, and we can't discern it in the 3D model because the alveoli are really extremely small. But if you can picture like a series of tiny balloons inside of your lungs, that would be what the structure of the alveoli would look like. And surrounding each little balloon, you would have tiny capillaries, because you'll notice that the lung is extremely well supplied with blood vessels. The red tube-like structures represent portions of the arterial vessels, and the blue ones represent portions of the venous blood vessels. So, to summarize, the portions of the human respiratory system that are visible to us in this three-dimensional model of the human torso are the nasal passages, which lead down to the pharyngeal area or the pharynx. We can see the larynx in blue here. And if we look further down, we can see the lungs. Luckily for us, we have two lungs inside of the thoracic cavity, and they rest on top of this structure here that is known as the diaphragm, that has a fairly curved shape. So in the model in which we have removed the outer portion of the heart, we can see the dome-shaped nature of the diaphragm. And the important function of this is in breathing, when the muscles contained here would contract, lowering the diaphragm somewhat, and thus increasing the capacity of the thoracic cavity, making it larger. And once it becomes larger, the air is pulled in through the nose and enters into the trachea, goes to the right and left lung. Today we're using the 3D model again, but this time to show some of the components of the human circulatory system and the location of the major parts of this human circulatory system. The three major areas that we want to consider when we're talking about the circulatory system are the blood vessels, which you can see here in blue and red, and the heart, which is extremely important, as we know, and we'll talk a little bit more about its location just now. And located inside of these blood vessels, but which is not possible to have in a 3D model, would be the fluid that actually transports substances throughout our bodies, and that is the blood. So blood flows through our blood vessels, and we have two major types. In blue, we have represented the veins, which generally carry blood that has been deoxygenated, meaning that the oxygen has been removed by the tissues that are supplied by these veins. And that oxygen has been removed for the purpose of aerobic respiration. And you can see how closely the respiratory system and the circulatory systems have to be connected. Because the purpose of the respiratory system is to allow ventilation of our lungs so that we can get air containing oxygen that we need for the purpose of cellular respiration. But how does that oxygen which we have taken in to our lungs and end up in the alveoli, how does that actually get all the way down to other parts of the human body? Notice the distance from the area where the lungs are located as compared to where the rest of the abdominal organs, such as the small intestine, stomach, liver, and so on, these are fairly distant. And then if you consider your legs, those are extremely distant from the location of the organs that are inside of the thoracic cavity. So, to recap briefly, the three major components of the human circulatory system that we can observe, we can only observe two of those components, and those are the blood vessels, in blue, veins, in red, the arteries, and the heart, the main pump, which is pushing the blood. The blood is the third component, which is not visible in our model. So the heart's job is to push the blood throughout the body, so that blood can circulate all the way down to your fingertips and all the way down to your toes, carrying life-giving oxygen that will allow all of those tissues to be able to respire aerobically and thus produce the energy that you need in order to continue living. We're going over to the second 3D model, in which the lungs have been removed to enable us to see a little bit more clearly the position of the pump, the heart. Notice that unlike in cartoons, the heart is not located all the way off to the left with a little arrow in it from Cupid. Instead, it's in the center of the thoracic cavity. Notice the thoracic cavity is separated from the abdominal cavity by this dome-shaped structure, the diaphragm. Look at the location of the heart. It is angled towards the left, but the bulk of the tissue of the heart is located in the center of your chest, or the thoracic cavity. You can see many blood vessels on the outside surface of the heart, and these are the blood vessels that actually supply oxygen to the heart muscle itself, because the heart is a living tissue and it also needs oxygen to carry out respiration, to produce the energy it needs to continue beating. There are veins to transport the waste products of respiration away from the heart as well, that we can see in the external view of our heart. And we can also see in this model that the heart is made up of two major areas. We have a right and a left upper chamber, or upper chambers, known as atria. A singular one is an atrium. So this here represents the right atrium. Notice it's larger than the left atrium. The bottom chambers, we also have right and left ventricles, but we would need to remove this top part in order for us to see what's inside and to see the separation between the right and the left ventricles. In the external view, which is what we are looking at right now, we cannot see the distinction between the right and the left ventricles. It appears to be one continuous structure when we're looking at it externally or from the outside. However, we can see that the two upper chambers are separated by these major blood vessels. The one in blue is the pulmonary artery, and the one in red behind it is the aorta. We will now remove this part of the model. We'll take the heart out from the area where it's located, and when we remove the heart, we can see some of the structures that we dealt with previously with the respiratory system. We can see the bronchi here, which are branches off of the trachea, and those go into the lungs, which are firmly fixed into the model. Behind that, this brown tube here represents the esophagus, and that is the tube leading down from your mouth into this. It would connect with the stomach. In the model, we are showing it slightly pulled apart because we have removed the liver, which helps to keep it in its correct place. Sometimes when people talk about getting heartburn, what is really happening is that acid reflux from the acids in the stomach have gone back up into this area here, and notice its location. It's right behind where the heart is. So that's why persons may experience what they think is a heart attack, but it's really just heartburn, and that is a problem of the digestive system. When you have acids going back up through the stomach and into the esophagus and causing some degree of pain. The heart itself is a complex structure, and we are going to remove the outer portion of it and look to see what's on the inside. So on the inside, we can see the 4 chambers. We could see the right atrium, the left atrium, and the bottom chambers are both ventricles. So we can see that the right ventricle is somewhat smaller than the left ventricle. Now, part of your job is to be able to explain the differences in size between the 2 ventricles and between the 2 atria once you have appreciated their functions. In this video, what we are showing you here are the structures, and we are showing the differences between the structures. But what you would have to do is to explain why the left ventricle is larger than the right, and why the right atrium is larger than the left atrium. So there are the 4 chambers that comprise the heart structure, and the upper chambers are separated from the lower chambers by these valves represented in the 3D model by these white structures. The valves help to control the flow of blood from the upper to the lower chambers. Persons may have problems with valves collapsing, and that would prevent the proper directional flow of blood through the heart. When the ventricles contract, the blood is pushed out of the heart and goes to, 2 major areas of the body. Blood that flows into this blue pulmonary artery is taken to the lungs to become oxygenated, and oxygenated blood is returned to the heart. Notice the close proximity of the heart to the lungs. Oxygenated blood is returned from the lungs into the left atrium through these blood vessels here, which are called the pulmonary veins. Now, the artist that designed these models has used particular colors for 4 reasons. The blue is generally used to represent the blood vessels, which are veins, and typically veins would carry deoxygenated blood from which oxygen has already been removed by tissues in the body. Notice that with this heart, we are seeing that this major blood vessel that takes blood towards the lungs is colored in blue, and I just called it the pulmonary artery. The name artery is given to it because blood is flowing away from the heart, and that is a typical direction of flow for all of the other arteries in the body. It's blue to indicate that the blood that's leaving the heart is deoxygenated blood, and this blood is going to the lungs where oxygen will be exchanged for carbon dioxide that's inside of this type of deoxygenated blood. So the carbon dioxide resulted as a byproduct of the respiratory actions that took place in the different cells all through the body, and that blood has been returned to the heart and had entered down through the vena cava, which is on the right side, and filled up this chamber here, the right atrium. When the upper chambers or the atria contract, the blood is pushed down into the lower chambers, the ventricles, and then when the ventricles contract, blood is pushed out of the heart. On the left side, the blood is being pushed out initially through the pulmonary artery going to the lungs, and this blood vessel here, the aorta, is taking oxygenated blood which had entered into the left side of the heart. It's taking that blood from the left ventricle. So if you can see inside of the left ventricle, there is a connection. These white structures here are the valves which prevent backflow of blood into the ventricle area. So the blood has to push past those valves and enter into this major artery of the body, which is the aorta. The aorta branches several times to supply the organs in the head, and then there are other branches that will supply the arms, the internal organs, as well as the legs. In the model, we can't see all of these different blood vessels, but what we can see are the connections between the main blood vessels that are connected to the heart. And we can see the location of the heart, as well as the 4 chambers which comprise the heart, and the valves which separate the upper and the lower chambers of the heart when we look at it from the inside. So this is as if we have taken a vertical section through the heart. When we replace the structures that we saw initially, in this view, we are looking at the heart as seen from the outside. So, in this view, we cannot discern the separation between the 2 lower chambers. It appears to be one large structure. Notice that these chambers are much more muscular and thicker, larger than the 2 top chambers. So the ventricles are much more muscular because they have the job of pumping the blood away from the heart, either towards the lungs through the pulmonary artery, or to all of the other blood vessels in the body through, starting with the aorta. The job of the atria is to collect blood. On the right, the blood that's being collected in here has come from all parts of the body, and on the left, blood has come from the lungs. So that's as much as we can see of the circulatory system using the 3-dimensional models to give you an appreciation of the location of the heart and some of the main blood vessels. And what you would see later on would be images showing you some of the structure of the blood. In other words, the types of cells that you find floating in the plasma, which comprise the blood that would be located inside of these blood vessels. And that brings us to the end of this demonstration of the 3D models looking at the 2 systems responsible for getting oxygen in and delivered to various parts of the body, and getting carbon dioxide, the major byproduct of aerobic respiration, out through initially through the alveoli in the lungs, and then up through the trachea and out through the nostrils.